There was a tension that hung over the world like never before. It was August 1945, and the Second World War had consumed 6 full years of blood, tears, and incomparable sacrifice. Millions of American soldiers had fallen on distant beaches, in foreign forests, in the frozen waters of the Pacific. Mothers lost sons who would never return home. Wives lost husbands who had promised to come back. Children grew up without knowing the faces of their fathers. The American nation, the one that had promised freedom and hope to the world, was exhausted to its core, but not defeated. It was determined. And on that early morning of August 6th, when the sky still slept over the island of Tinian, an airplane called Enola Gay, named in honor of pilot Paul Tibbets' mother, would be the instrument that would end it all. It was not merely a warplane. It was the living symbol of a nation that had channeled all its ingenuity, all its willpower, all its courage into a single mission: to bring war to the heart of the enemy in a way so devastating that the world would never forget the price of aggression and tyranny. Paul Tibbets was a 30-year-old man, born in Quincy, Illinois, a son of deep America, who had grown up watching his country fight for survival against the forces of darkness. He was not a movie hero, not a man seeking glory or recognition. He was a soldier, an experienced pilot who had flown dozens of dangerous missions, who had seen friends fall from the sky in flames, who carried the weight of every decision made at thousands of meters of altitude. Tibbets understood the responsibility that fell upon his shoulders. He knew that this mission would be different from all the others. He knew that history would judge him, that future generations would analyze every second of that flight. But he also knew that Americans were dying every day on the islands of the Pacific, that there were mothers praying for their sons to return, that there was a war that needed to end. When he received the order to pilot the Enola Gay on a special mission, Tibbets did not hesitate. He accepted it with the dignity and patriotism that define the American character in its most crucial moments. He was just one man, but he represented something far greater than himself. He represented the determination of a nation to protect freedom. The preparation for that mission was surrounded by absolute secrecy. No one knew exactly what would be transported. The soldiers who carried the atomic bomb, that device which had cost billions of dollars and involved the greatest scientists in the world, knew only that they were participating in something extraordinary. The B-29 superfortress was a masterpiece of American engineering, an aircraft so advanced that its enemies still possessed nothing comparable. It had immense range, impressive speed, and a durability that made it practically invulnerable to enemy fighters. But that night, it would carry more than just metal and fuel. It would carry the future. It would carry the hope that the war would finally end. It would carry the responsibility of millions of lives hanging in the balance. American mechanics worked with perfect precision, checking every bolt, every system, every detail. They knew there was no margin for error. A mechanical failure would mean the failure of the mission. A failure would mean more Americans would die in the trenches and on the beaches. Every man who touched that airplane that night was part of something historic, even if he did not fully comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. When the Enola Gay took off from the Tinian runway, carrying its lethal cargo, the heart of an entire nation took off with it. Paul Tibbets and his crew of 11 men flew through the darkness toward a destination that would change the world forever. Each member of that crew was an anonymous hero, men who had trained for months for that specific mission, who understood the importance of what they were doing, but who also carried the emotional weight of it. There was the bombardier, there were the engineers, there were the observers. All of them were ordinary Americans, young men who could have been in any city in the country, in any factory, on any farm. But in that moment, they were part of something epic. They flew for hours over the dark Pacific, with the stars as their only companions. Tibbets kept the airplane on a steady course, his hand on the controls, his mind focused on the task. He thought of his mother, Enola Gay, whose name was painted on the fuselage. He thought of all the soldiers who had died. He thought of the responsibility he carried, and he continued flying, because that is what an American does when his country calls. When Hiroshima appeared on the horizon that morning of August 6th, the city was sleeping, unaware that its last moments of peace were coming to an end. The bombardier Thomas Ferriby, a member of the Enola Gay's crew, had the responsibility of releasing the bomb at the exact moment. His eyes were fixed on the sight, his hand ready on the button. Below them, an entire city lived its ordinary lives, not knowing that history was about to change. There were children sleeping in their beds. There were workers preparing for another day of work. There were mothers feeding their children. There was life. There was normalcy. There was hope. And then, in a second that would last forever, everything changed. The bomb was released. It fell through the air, through the atmosphere, toward the city below. Tibbets turned the airplane, accelerating, trying to get as far away as possible. He knew what was coming. He knew that in a few seconds history would be rewritten. And when the flash of white light illuminated the sky, when the shock wave shook the airplane, when Tibbets saw the mushroom-shaped cloud rising into the sky, he understood that he had participated in something that would never be forgotten. The flight back home was silent. The crew of the Enola Gay flew across the Pacific in a profound silence, each man with his own thoughts, his own emotions, his own moral questions. Tibbets kept the airplane on course, but his mind was elsewhere. He had done his duty as an American soldier. He had carried out the order. He had participated in a mission that he had been told could spare hundreds of thousands of American lives by ending the war without the need for a land invasion of Japan. But he also knew that he had changed the world. He knew that he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. When they landed at Tinian, they were received as heroes, because that is what they were. But they were also men who carried the weight of a decision that would affect human history forever. Tibbets was promoted, received medals, was recognized as a hero. But he never forgot that flight, never forgot the silence of the crew on the way back, never forgot the responsibility he had carried. Days later, Japan surrendered. The Second World War had ended. Millions of American lives were spared because the war ended without the need for a land invasion that would have cost hundreds of thousands of American soldiers. Mothers who had prayed for their sons to return could finally embrace them. Wives who had lost hope could finally receive their husbands back. Children who grew up without knowing their fathers could finally meet them. The American nation had won. It had paid a terrible price. It had lost hundreds of thousands of its sons, but it had won. And the Enola Gay, that airplane that had carried the atomic bomb, had been the instrument of that final victory. It was not a victory that could be celebrated without ambiguity. It was not a victory that did not leave moral questions in its wake, but it was a victory that had preserved freedom, that had defeated tyranny, that had allowed America to continue to be the land of freedom and opportunity. The legacy of the Enola Gay and that historic mission remains complex and profound. Paul Tibbets lived until 2007, carrying that experience for more than 60 years. He never regretted his action, but he also never stopped acknowledging the gravity of what had happened. The airplane itself was preserved. Now it rests in a museum, a silent monument to that moment when humanity entered a new era. Visitors from all over the world come to see the Enola Gay, come to try to understand, come to try to reconcile military necessity with human cost. It is a place of reflection, a place where history is not simple, where answers are not easy, where the complexity of war and human decision is confronted directly. But it is also a place where one can understand the American character in one of its most crucial moments. The willingness to do what is necessary, even when it is difficult, even when it is painful, even when the consequences are unimaginable. The story of the Enola Gay and its mission is the story of America in its purest and most complicated essence. It is the story of ordinary men who were called to do extraordinary things. It is the story of a nation that faced an existential threat and responded with all its strength, all its ingenuity, all its determination. It is the story of sacrifice, of courage, of responsibility. It is the story of Paul Tibbets, who piloted that airplane with the dignity of an American soldier. It is the story of a crew that understood the importance of what they were doing. It is the story of millions of Americans who supported the war effort, who worked in factories, who prayed at home, who waited for the return of their loved ones. The Enola Gay represents all of this. It represents the moment when America proved itself capable of doing what was necessary to protect freedom, even if the price was incalculable. And even if future generations question that decision, even if there is moral debate about that moment, one thing remains true. It was an act of a nation that refused defeat, that refused tyranny, that refused to allow darkness to prevail. The flight of the Enola Gay on that early morning of August 6, 1945, changed human history forever. It was not just the end of a war. It was the beginning of a new era, an era in which humanity possessed the power to destroy itself completely. But it was also a testament to the American character, to the willingness of men and women to make extraordinary sacrifices for freedom. Paul Tibbets and his crew were not villains. They were not simple heroes. They were men who lived in an extraordinary time, who were called to do extraordinary things, who responded with the patriotism and courage that define the best American tradition. When we look back on that moment, when we study that flight, when we contemplate the Enola Gay in its museum, we must remember not just the bomb, not just the destruction, but also the millions of Americans who died in the Second World War, the mothers who lost sons, the wives who lost husbands, the children who grew up without their fathers. We must remember that that decision was made in a context of total war, of total sacrifice, of a struggle for the very survival of freedom. And we must honor those who made that sacrifice, who answered the call of their country, who helped ensure that freedom prevailed. The Enola Gay is a monument to all of this, to courage, to sacrifice, to the complexity of history, and to the unwavering determination of the American people to protect freedom, whatever the cost.